Welcome to the latest episode of History You Didn't Know But Should. I'm Ray.
And I'm Chris.
And today we're going to be going back to the ancient world. For the first time in the history of our history podcast, Chris, we're going to be going back to ancient Rome, and we're going to be looking at the third of the Julio-Claudian emperors of the first century. We're going to be looking at Gaius Julius Caesar Germanicus, also known as Little Boots.
Yeah, and Ray, I think this is important for us to study. Most people, when they hear about world history, it's easy to tune out. But I encourage our listeners to hang with us, because I would dare to say that at the end of our time together, we will have demonstrated the dangers of allowing a deranged person into power who cares very little about life or anything unless it involves himself.
Yeah, Caligula, when you think about first century Roman emperors, I mean, very few of them come out looking very well. I mean, you think of someone like Tiberius, who, you know, if you read Suetonius, the 12 Caesars, he comes out looking like a monster. Then you got Nero, and a lot of people know about Nero and the fire and all that kind of stuff. But Caligula, I mean, I think he may be the most deranged and wicked of them all, at least as far as those first emperors were concerned.
Yeah, and you know, you have to look at the whole aspect of the person, and you know, I guess we'll call him Caligula, but as you just mentioned, all of his names are important, especially as we start diving into who he was. But you know, when Caligula was young, he went on military campaigns with his father. I mean, we're talking as a young child, and his father actually had a soldier's uniform that he placed on him, and so the troops, they would see Caligula and his dad, and they started calling him Caligula. And of course, Caligula means, as you just mentioned, it means little boots, and so you have to wonder, you know, did Caligula take that affectionately, or did he see it as an insult? But one thing we do know is that Caligula hated this nickname. And he would journey through life with this massive chip on his shoulder from a very, very small age. And then it's just one thing after another. And the next thing you know, there is this twisted story that comes out of Rome, and it just completely shatters everything that was being established.
Yeah, so let's go back and let's talk a little about Gaius's or Caligula's father, a little bit about his upbringing. He was born in 12 A.D. To Agrippina, the elder, and to Germanicus. Now, his father Germanicus was a Roman general, and he was quite popular, something of a hero, I think, to the point where Emperor Tiberius got a little jealous of him, and there's some thought that Tiberius may have had him offed.
Yeah, and you know, I mean, you think about this, as you're mentioning, look at the line that Caligula comes from. I mean, Julius Caesar. Everybody knows Julius Caesar, the great-great-grandfather of Caligula. But then you have Augustus, who was his grandfather. And I mean, Augustus is probably one of the greatest leaders of all time in Rome. And I mean, actually kind of was so confident about that, and that the people were confident, that they changed a month in the Roman calendar to something that we're actually in right now, August. And so, I mean, that's his grandfather, and then his father, Germanicus, is one of the most effective and popular generals. But there you also have to see, how in the world does one person fall so far away from the apple tree?
Yeah, I think part of the answer may go back to what happened after his father died. Of course, Tiberius had Caligula's mother and brothers and sisters put away, and they all eventually would die. And Caligula would be sent to live with Tiberius, and that was not a healthy situation at all. Caligula would be exposed to torture, not him being tortured, but him seeing people tortured, and apparently it was something that he came to like, though initially I think he didn't. But he came to like watching people be tortured, and that's going to become important when he becomes emperor. But even Tiberius himself, as deranged as Tiberius himself was, he said at one point, he says that he was nurturing a viper for Rome. I mean, he looked at Caligula and he knew something wasn't right with this guy.
Yeah, and I think, we can't forget about Mom. I mean, Mom was tough. I mean, Agrippina the Elder, she was a tough and courageous woman. I mean, this is one of the earliest accounts of women actually going out on the battlefield.
Yep.
She followed her husband on the battlefield. She served as an advisor, and she made it be known that she believed that she would be the mother of emperors. Mm-hmm. And she didn't like Tiberius, and she would insult Tiberius and all of these things, which is why Tiberius exiles the mom.
Yep.
And, she basically refuses to eat and kind of just waste away. But as you start thinking about that, Augustus that we mentioned earlier. So the Augustus names Tiberius, who's his stepson, right? Mm-hmm. He names him as the heir, but had this very specific condition which said, hey, I respect Caligula's father, and so Tiberius, here's what I'm asking you to do. You must promise that when you're no longer in power, Tiberius, that you will make the great general your heir.
And he got rid of the great general.
Exactly. It's amazing how the best laid plans were about to go down in flames.
Well, you got these people who are all very jealous for power. A lot of them, I think, Tiberius certainly was, Caligula would be, Nero would be, not only jealous for power, but I think to some degree insecure in their power. They were very threatened by any perceived threat, even if it wasn't a real threat, a perceived threat to their power and authority. So when Germanicus is more popular than Tiberius in some ways, Tiberius is like, no, not going to go along with this. We've got to stop this. So he kills Caligula's father. He ultimately exiles and kills Caligula's mothers and siblings. Caligula goes to live there with Tiberius. Like we said, Tiberius even recognizes this kid is maybe not the best news for what's coming in Rome, because of course he knew now that his father was gone, he would be the next emperor. And Tiberius actually does something to try to prevent that. He gives a co-rule. There's supposed to be this co-rule when Caligula comes into power, where Caligula, and I believe it was a nephew or somebody, it was a younger relative, not a nephew, but a younger relative who was supposed to be a co-rule with Caligula. But when Caligula comes to power, he doesn't even, that's just not going to happen. But going back to Tiberius, according to Suetonius, Caligula killed Tiberius, or at least aided in his death.
Yeah, and you have to ask yourself, what conceived Tiberius to keep Caligula alive?
Yeah.
I mean, Tiberius killed all members of Caligula's family. Mm-hmm. And yes, Caligula was young during this part, but I mean, that really didn't stop anybody from, murder in this age in Rome. So if you kill mom, if you kill the brothers, if you kill dad, if you kill everybody, but you leave this boy, and not only do you leave the boy, but eventually when Tiberius' son dies, he actually brings Caligula into his place and adopts him.
And says this kid's going to be a viper.
Says it.
So, even if he's not a child anymore, even if he's a teenager, maybe you're seeing the problems. Maybe it's time to, I hate to say this, but maybe Tiberius should have done something then.
You would think so, but Tiberius, you say about the viper, but Tiberius also said that Caligula served Tiberius so well, and he had to have. The guy killed his mother, killed his brothers, killed his dad. How do you hide that? But yet Tiberius says, or somebody said, never was there a better servant than Caligula towards Tiberius, the murderer of his entire family.
He must have been wearing a mask.
Multiple masks.
Caligula had to be wearing a mask.
Had to.
And I think at some point it does come off, and you see the way he treats the Senate and Rome in general. there may have been a lot of unresolved issues there, to say the least.
Well, I think so. And then, you find, I guess, maybe Caligula's kind of waiting in the wings for his one moment, for his opportunity, for that thing that will allow him to shine. And I think it happens when Tiberius is basically letting Rome fall to the ground. I mean, these Roman emperors, they do everything they can to get to power. And when they get to power, the one thing they want to do is spend money, erect temples, become gods, and just pretty much let Rome fall apart. And so Tiberius is just sitting there enjoying life while being
not even living in the city of Rome.
He's like on his vacation home.
Yeah, he won't even come into the city. But Gaius, shortly after Tiberius's death, he's made emperor. In fact, when the Senate gets hold of it, the day he arrives in the Senate, the Senate immediately confirms power on Caligula, on Gaius, and the other grandson. It was the grandson of Tiberius. No, he's not going to be co-ruler. This guy's going to have it all himself. So the Senate gives him the emperorship, and Suetonius says that in the celebrations that occur over the next 3 months, approximately 160,000 people were publicly sacrificed over the next 3 months.
But
it's celebration.
In celebration, because people described him as the first emperor who everyone in the empire loved.
Yeah.
I mean, this is a guy who you say wearing a mask, but man, he was so good because, I mean, his first step is he delivered this passionate, weepy, tearful, funeral eulogy, if you will, for Tiberius. I mean, here's the guy who is giving a speech at the funeral of the one who murdered his entire family, and he is basically giving Tiberius an extravagant burial. So the guy is one of the best manipulators that you've ever come across, and he knew how to work a crowd. By the way, isn't that interesting? We know several other historical figures throughout history who knew how to work a crowd, which gets the people to love, to respect, and ultimately to follow them, even if it leads to what you just said, this maniacal plot where you're killing a bunch of people, whether it's in Dachau or Auschwitz, or it's on the streets of Rome as a means of sacrifice. I mean, this shows you how people can truly manipulate people to follow them because of the way that they speak and the way that they talk and the way that they get that crowd.
Yeah, and he is very good, and it's not just a speech at Tiberius' funeral. One thing he does is he recalls exiles, Roman exiles. He dismisses criminal charges that have been laid against certain people. So he's doing things. He's throwing parties. He's spending money like it's going out of business. And he ultimately breaks the empire, or comes very close to doing so. And he's doing things that are very popular with the average person. And he seems, and it says at one point that sometimes at night the whole city was illuminated. People, parties were going on. This was a good time, and everything seems to be going well, Chris, until he gets sick.
Well, yeah, and I think, as you're going to allude to his sickness, and you start to see this madness begin to creep in. But you mentioned something about spending money just recklessly, and there's a story I think about Caligula that speaks to just how recklessly he threw away money, and that is he wanted to build a bridge. Now, building a bridge in Roman times, I mean, by the way, they built some of the best roads. We probably could take some lessons from them on building roads. But, Caligula decides that he's going to build a floating bridge across the Bay of Naples. This has nothing to do with a need for transportation or for trade or anything. This is so he can stick it to one of his enemies. There's this guy whose name was Thorsalis, I think is his name, right? He was an astronomer, and he made this prediction. He basically said, I tell you that Caligula has no more chance of becoming emperor than of being able to ride a horse across the Gulf Baye. And so Caligula becomes emperor. And what does he do? He builds a bridge. And he builds this bridge, which is on these countless floating pontoons, which is basically really amazing, right? And so he creates this glorious but also pointless bridge. and he covers himself in a gold cloak. He puts on Alexander the Great's breastplate, and he crosses the bridge on his horse. Why? To show that guy that he did become emperor and what he could do about it.
Yeah, very, very wise use of the budget there.
Yes.
But, I mean, this is the kind of thing that he does. I mean, he makes his horse, all sorts of attention and good treatment. I think he was going to make him a member of the Senate had he not been killed when he did. This guy is deeply disturbed.
Well, yeah, and what did he do with the horse? He builds this beautiful palace for the horse, right? The horse has a bigger house than most of the people in Rome, and every night he sets aside this gold plate and gold saucer, and he and the horse have dinner together. And it was said that if they became so loud, the arena was not too far from Caligula's place, and sometimes they would be really, really loud. He'd send his guards down there and he'd say, listen, my horse needs to sleep. Y'all need to stop. And if you can't stop, I'll kill every single one of you. But I care about my horse. I mean, he loved this horse. I mean, he'd bring the horse in. I mean, think about that. You're sitting across from your table with a horse.
With a horse on the other side.
I mean, all we know is Mr. Ed, but I mean, this guy had, I think his name was Invincitus or something like that. I mean, it just starts to show that this guy, but then he starts becoming a cruel tyrant, and that's when it changes.
Suetonius says, and I'm going to quote Suetonius here, so much for the emperor, the rest of this history must deal with the monster. Such a interesting statement, because he sort of divides it up here. He says, okay, I've talked about the emperor, now let's talk about the monster. He goes away sick, allegedly, and people are worried about him. Right. People are genuinely worried about him through Rome. There's word he might not survive. He comes back, and he's a different man. This is not the man that went away. This is a man who, at this particular point, enjoys killing people, enjoys torturing people, enjoys bringing people in and having them watch their spouse or somebody slowly tortured to death. This is a man who said, let them feel like they are dying. I mean, he becomes this sort of outrageous monster there in Rome.
And believed he was a god.
Oh, he definitely
not just a man. He comes back thinking he is a god, and actually doesn't just think that he's a god, but he resents the actual gods being worshipped alongside of him, to the point where he goes and he removes the heads from the statues of all these gods and puts his own head on them.
And he creates a shrine to himself. Yes. He has priests. And of course, the richest people in Rome are there trying to become one of his priests, I guess, to keep in good stead with him. If it was me, I'd have been trying to get as far away from there as I could.
Right.
But he definitely spends a lot of time trying to aggrandize himself. But Chris, there's evidence here of a mental illness, more than the horse, more than the bridge, more than some of this other stuff. He has insomnia. He doesn't sleep very well. He roams the palace at night, yelling and talking to himself and doing some strange behavior. So there is evidence that this wasn't just simply a madman. This wasn't just simply a powerful man. This may have been a mentally ill man.
Yeah, but here's the thing. Even in the midst of all that, the people in Rome still liked him for the most part because of what he had done for the city. Mm-hmm. And so I have a hard time understanding how the citizenry can turn an eye to everything that's going on. I mean, there was the occasion when he was in the Colosseum and they ran out of prisoners to kill that day. And they said, sir, we have no more entertainment for you. And he said, here's what we'll do. Draw a number. And they drew a number, and it was section 108. And he said, take every person in section 108, and you put them in the arena, and you kill them. I mean, how do people turn an eye away from this guy and not do something about it? I mean, I don't understand that. How can you allow that to continue to go on? Unless, as you mentioned, you're just too scared to say anything. So you just kind of see no evil, hear no evil, and just,
Too scared to say anything, but it may also have been, this guy's good for me. I'm doing quite well. I'm enjoying the shows. I'm doing well in my life. So I'm just going to look the other way while it happens.
So as long as it doesn't affect me,
that's right.
I don't care. Mm-hmm. Isn't that, I mean, hard to believe. But here's the thing.
But that's not without precedent, though. As long as it doesn't negatively affect me, I'm good with it. So.
And history, we study history so that hopefully it doesn't repeat itself. But isn't that still true?
Hopefully.
I mean,
hopefully.
I mean,
that's one of the goals.
I mean, yeah,
we don't repeat some of these.
But aren't we? If we look back in time, you said precedent, and we think back into recent times and other times, there are still people who will do anything for their leader. They will just, they will fall on the sword. They will turn whatever it is they'll do. But what was it that really got Caligula the final straw? What was that final straw? It wasn't necessarily the madness. It wasn't, a lot of this other stuff. But really, what got people upset is that he wanted to move to Alexandria. And he wanted to move to Alexandria, Egypt. Now, think about that for a second. When your capital in Rome and you get the right idea that you want to move to Egypt, people are going to get upset with you. But the reason why he wants to do that is because the people in Alexandria, they understand about divinity. They understand about gods and worshiping gods. And the people in Rome just think, this is a crazy wacko, but he's helping us out. But if he moves to Egypt, okay, this might be pretty good. But the people in Rome are like, dude, you can't do that.
Well, I think he may also, be trying to get away from some of the bad thoughts that maybe some people were having, the way he treated the Senate.
Right.
And there's evidence that, of course, there were some people who were becoming very unhappy with what he was doing. Because one of the things he did, you talk about Tiberius hurting the budget. Caligula was a spendthrift. I mean, the bridge is an example. The house for his horse is an example. He was an absolute spendthrift, and he just was bankrupting the city. It's to the point where taxes and tributes and other things that were coming in were not enough to make up for the money he was spending. So he was just spending more than was coming in, and that couldn't be sustained.
Right. And there's only so many people that you can tick off before something doesn't come back in and get you.
Yeah. And there's another side to him, though. There is another side to Caligula. We talk about the monster of Caligula. But he had a wife. He was married. He had a child. And according to all accounts, he was very devoted to them, though he did threaten his wife. Let me see if I can find it real quick. But he did threaten his wife, basically telling her that, he would cut her throat at any time. He says, and this is from Suetonius again, he said, quote, "He never kissed the neck of his wife or mistress without saying, 'And this beautiful throat will be cut whenever I please.'"
Well, but
there's romance for you.
Well, there's romance, and that's that whole idea of I'm keeping my friends close and my enemies closer.
And keep her scared, too.
And keep her scared, knowing that, seeing what he has done and understanding what he's willing to do. I mean, because the man was willing to do anything to get what he wanted. But he also kind of had these, the Roman emperors had a guard that was around them. I guess, we could consider it like Secret Service today, if you will. And he had this Praetorian guard, but... finally there's somebody who says this guy's got to be stopped, which all throughout history of the Roman Empire, you see this. There's somebody who's in the close circle who might not have the power, but might be a guard or something, who says, this guy's got to be stopped.
Yeah. And a lot of times they're not successful. But in this particular case, they were successful. Caligula is on January 24. He is in the theater. And he leaves the theater, and there was a secret passageway where he could get back to his palace, and he is killed by members of his guard right there in the tunnel.
While he was speaking to a group of young actors. Yeah. And, now it is interesting that the one who kind of started this, or who was in charge of the attack, if you will, he had been mocked. He had been bullied by Caligula, and he'd been called derogatory names, and I'm sure, that finally this guy had had enough, and he got others who had had enough, and they swarmed the emperor, and they cut him down.
And his wife is killed. His young child is killed. It was a daughter, And the way they killed her is they picked her up by her ankles and bashed her head against the rocks.
And they had to go find her.
Yeah.
I mean, it wasn't like she was right down the road. I mean, they actually went and tracked them down. Yeah. But Ray,
think
think
about rid of
about
any possible descendants.
the bloodline.
Right.
They wanted to get rid of that bloodline. But Ray, think about this. Let's just try to mirror the two. We all know about Et tu, Brute. We talk about Julius Caesar and these things. But if you will, what was Caligula's name again, his official name?
Gaius Julius Caesar Germanicus.
So Julius Caesar,
Yeah.
who was assassinated while talking to a group of people, stabbed over 30 times. Great-grandfather to Caligula. And here is Caligula, another dictator, claiming absolute power. Both of those individuals stabbed. Both of them turned on by people who were close to them. I think we start to see a little theme that goes on this. I mean, by the time Caligula dies, he is so hated that the Roman Senate tries to completely erase him from Roman history.
Well, they try to erase him from history, but they also want to get rid of the Senate. I mean, the empire at that point. There's talk about going back to the Republic, but of course, then Claudius is sworn in by the was it the Praetorian Guard?
Yes, the Praetorian.
He's sort of sworn in and made emperor before anything can be done to get rid of the empire. And Claudius is sort of sad. You talk about Caligula making fun of people and making people the butt of his jokes. Suetonius says Gaius preserved his uncle Claudius merely as a butt of his practical jokes. So when you think about Claudius, and the story about when they went to make him emperor, he was hiding behind some curtains or something. You sort of get this idea the man may have been a little bit of reluctant here.
Right.
But Caligula was not a nice guy to most people he came across. And it's interesting, he may have not even been a nice guy after his death. There are rumors that, of course, his body is taken out. It's partially cremated on a fire, and then it's sort of thrown in a shallow grave until some people went and claimed the body and gave it, I guess, a proper burial or whatever. But it was said that something horrible appeared every night at the scene of his murder until at last the building burned. It said that he haunted the place where he was murdered. So,
Little Boots had the opportunity to follow his dad, this great general. Got to see the battlefield, got to learn from his great-grandfather and his grandfather. I mean, honestly, Caligula was set up for success.
Yeah.
Everything was there. But he allowed greed, power, and also just this lack of concern and care for others to just consume him. And he threw away everything. And now all we know of Caligula is this deranged, really madman of a leader who destroyed, but really started to really see the destruction of the Roman Empire.
So, Chris, what do you think, if we're going to wrap this up, we're going to land the plane here, what do you think would be the number one lesson for history from Caligula? I mean, a lesson maybe for politics.
Yeah, and I think that it's the lesson for politics, it's the lesson for life, is that if you want to be successful, it always starts with respect. That you must respect the government, you must respect your neighbor, you must respect your community, you must respect your family, but ultimately you need to respect yourself. And that you need to recognize that one person cannot do everything. Absolute power will not guarantee you success. It will not guarantee you notoriety.
Anything.
Anything. Yeah. And so I think that as I look in today's society, I see people rising to power who are trying to develop a following of people that says, come with me and I'll take you to the promised land. I will provide you riches beyond measure. I'll do all of these things, but you have to trust me and follow me and do as I say, instead of going and saying, together we can achieve great things. It's going to require work. I need you who has this skill, this skill, this skill. So I think the lesson is kingdom building, nation building, community building requires us working together and not trying to climb the ladder. Because, Caligula climbed the ladder to the top. Mm-hmm. Sure, you'll get there. Sure, you'll be president, leader, whatever, but you'll be alone.
Yeah, and I think maybe sort of applying that to the average person on the street. When you're looking at someone who wants power, when you're looking at someone who seeks power, how much do they seek it? Someone who seeks power too much, they have that drive for power a little too much. Yeah. That might be a warning sign. It might be a warning sign. Again, it doesn't matter whether it's a nation, an empire, a business, a church, whatever it may be. Someone who desires power that much, maybe that's a warning flag that people need to pay attention to.
At the end of the day, we were all created to be in relationship with one another.
Right.
Caligula didn't understand that. He didn't see that. Not only did he pay for it, all of Rome paid for it.
All of Rome paid for it. Very good. Thank you for a great episode, Chris.
Thank you.
Look forward to doing more episodes in the future on the ancient world.
Yeah.
We like to stick with American history, but every once in a while it doesn't hurt to go back to the ancient world or the medieval period or something like that. For our listeners, we thank you for joining us today. Please share this podcast with your friends. Remember, we're on Stitcher, we're on Sounder, we're on Google Podcasts. We're on Facebook. We're on, where are we not? We're on Twitter. We're all over the place. So please share the link. Please share the podcast with your friends and family. If you have any comments, questions, or anything you would like to recommend for us, feel free to email us at historyyousshouldknow@gmail.com. That's history, the letter you should know, @gmail.com. Until next time, I'm Ray.
And I'm Chris.
And we'll talk to you later.